Hi, I'm Sean Duggan, and welcome to TheFIX, the podcast about Photoshop, Lightroom, post-processing, and all the cool and creative things that we get to do with our images after the shoot. On today's show, my guest is Dave Cross, a very familiar figure in the Photoshop training world, and we're going to be talking about his latest venture, which involves stock photography for Photoshop compositing. Stay with us. Well, thanks for tuning in and stopping by my corner of the internet for this week's show, my corner of thisweekinphoto.com. I do appreciate that. And I am pleased to welcome today Dave Cross, who has been active as a Photoshop and digital imaging, digital design trainer for many, many years. Hey, Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
How is the weather down in sunny Florida where you're at?
Well, it's funny because people who don't live here find it hard to imagine when we're complaining that it's not as cool as it normally is this time of year, because we look forward to that time where you can wake up in the morning and it's actually 65 degrees. And the last week or so, we actually set record highs, which normally people wouldn't complain about, but I look forward to those morning walks in the cooler air. So not so cool recently, but then again, it's not snowing, so I'm never going to complain about that.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Well, it's not snowing where I am at either. I'm in the Sierra foothills, and we had some rain the past few days. And of course, in California, that's a cause for great rejoicing since we've had this drought for the last several years. So we're hoping that continues. And they did have snow up in the mountains about just a little bit less than an hour from my house. So that's pretty cool. But I was thinking in preparation for this episode that it's November now, and at least in the northern half of our planet, the days are getting shorter, the nights are longer, and of course where I'm at, it's getting cooler, and maybe by small degrees slightly cooler where you're at. So it's like a good time to kind of get inside, find a comfy place, and work on some Photoshop composites.
Definitely, yeah, for sure.
And so, you've been active in the Photoshop and just general digital imaging training world for a long time. And I was, poking around your website, and I was surprised to see that you actually started teaching Adobe Illustrator classes back in 1987.
Yeah.
That's like back in the days. That's in the days of black and white Macs.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't add it into the bio, but the very first class I taught was actually PageMaker 1.2.
Oh, so. That was back when it was all this PageMaker,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, that's going way back. And
so
of course,
a lot of things have changed. For sure.
Oh yeah, totally. A lot of things have changed. And of course, a lot of people may be familiar with you from your time at Kelby Media as one of the famous Photoshop guys.
Right.
Always used to love all those crazy skits that you guys put together for Photoshop.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that was every time we were filming one of those, we'd always at one point just stop and laugh and go, "I can't believe we're actually getting paid to do this," because we were educating but having a good time along the way. So always lots of fun for sure.
Yeah, no, they were always fun, and it was always like a big highlight of Photoshop world to see what they were going to come up with next.
Right.
and so now you've been running your own studio and training business for a while now. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's been since 2011. I decided to return to the world of entrepreneurship, which I had done for many years in Canada before I went to work for the Kelby Group, and set up a photo studio, which is both a rental studio and also where I teach the occasional workshop. And as most people realize, in the last few years, the in-person training world has been decreasing, mostly because of it's so easy now to do online things, including Google Hangouts and Skype and YouTube and everything else. So now in my photo studio, I don't do as much work. Many of the workshops there, I have a recording area where I record online videos. So I have an online training site where I do a new tutorial every week and occasionally add a full-length course. And I still do Photoshop training for whoever wants it. So just 2 weeks ago, I was in Bradford, Pennsylvania, which is the home of Zippo lighters, because I needed to do some on-site training there, which was really fun. So I still do a lot of that kind of stuff, as well as speaking at events whenever I can. But for me, the ability to provide education in one form or another, however it might be today, including moving more towards the online part, still lets me do what I love, which is the teaching side of things.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the online world has definitely, as you say, changed a lot in the last several years in terms of, what's available either through, kind of a live webinar sort of thing, or recorded courses, or, lynda.com or Kelby One, all of those things. A lot of great resources for people.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's certainly great for people who don't necessarily live near, maybe a larger population center where a big workshop or presentation or seminar might be coming.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. And so you have another new venture. Speaking of the entrepreneurial spirit, there you have another new venture, and I read about this some weeks back, and I found it very, very intriguing, simply because it deals with compositing. And I am an enthusiastic Photoshop compositing artist myself, and it was just such a great idea. I was like, God, why didn't I have that idea?
Someone actually suggested the logo should be someone doing that, because almost everyone that sees it goes, "Oh, yeah, okay."
Well, so I've actually done things similar to that myself, but not in such a kind of master of the universe kind of way, in terms of placing a person in the shot. Sometimes if the camera's on a tripod, I'll put myself in a shot to give myself not so much a size reference, but sometimes a lighting reference. What was the light doing here? But explain to our viewers and listeners just exactly what you have had cooking for a while, and what is now just actually starting to come to a nice simmer and be ready.
Sure. Well, basically, that I too have spent a lot of time doing compositing, and I found that the two biggest challenges I faced were trying to find a background. If I went to a traditional stock photo site, I could certainly find images of an alleyway or a brick wall or something, but they probably weren't shot with compositing in mind. So the angle might not match. And also there was really no frame of reference to know light sources or scaling or anything like that. So I spent a lot of my time doing waist up compositing, because it's easier when you're putting a person in a photo without having to figure out where their legs go. And I do a lot of work with with people. So it struck me that I wanted to have some kind of frame of reference that I could put in the background, and then when I shot the person, and I wanted something that was portable and very visual. So I had the idea of like the safety cones that you see on the side of the road when they're doing construction, but I didn't really want to carry one of those things around. And when it all kind of fell into place is when I found a place that makes this, which is, it's basically a safety cone, but I'm just going to make a noise here. It's collapsible. So you can easily stick it in with the rest of your camera gear. It's very lightweight. And what you do is you put your camera on a tripod and you take two photos, one with the cone in the photo and one without. So that becomes your two-layered background. And then in your studio or wherever you're shooting the person or the subject matter, you put the same cone in it. And then when you combine the images together, instead of having any guesswork about scale, first of all, you scale the cone so they're the same, so it's exactly the right size. But there's also other benefits, like if there's a cast shadow or things like that you see on the cone, that helps you figure that out with the lighting of the person. So I started doing that just for myself. And as I talked to other people, they're like, somebody along the way said, I wish someone sold a collection of backgrounds made specifically for compositing. And that was that little light bulb moment where I went, this could work. So I did some kind of experimenting and testing, and worked with a few people and bought a few of these cones to seed to a few people and say, give it a shot. And also did a couple of sort of mini focus groups, and found that a lot of other people really liked the same idea, because they were looking for a place where they could easily find a background that they could more easily match with their subject matter. And also for things like someone who lives in one part of the world but really wants to offer, say they're a senior photographer and want to offer more interesting backgrounds than just the places they've always been to in their neck of the woods. This way they can have their senior, if she's a travel enthusiast, she could be standing in front of the Eiffel Tower or whatever it is, because somebody in that part of the world has captured this 2-layer document and uploaded it to the website that now is available for purchase. Along the way, that was the original idea, was just the cone-based background. But then people said, well, I still do some waist-up compositing, so having backgrounds that don't have the cone in them, that have, for waist-up, including ones that have depth of field in them, so that if you want to have something where it's not just, someone standing in front of a beach that's everything in focus, but create the look of something that's shot with depth of field. And then other people started saying, well, I do fine art and I'm always looking for textures to overlay and design elements like broken clocks and gears and elements that I could include. So that has become part of it now. So it basically, the site includes the backgrounds with the cone, waist up backgrounds, including some with depth of field, textures like, well, name a texture, but basically everything like peeling paint and metal and rust, and also something that I've sort of categorized as design elements, which means like old stamps or gears and watch faces and, old telephones, or things that are sort of isolated on a background that people could easily use as part of a collage or a fine art project they were doing. So basically it's still kind of morphing into itself in terms of where it's going to go. But the main focus is the fact that for the full length compositing, it's so much easier now, I think, to do it using the cone. But along the way, if you also want to have interesting borders or textures or elements in your design that you can't find elsewhere because they're not really meant for this purpose, that will be kind of the focus. Also considering, I had a couple people talk about, what about things like sets of cool brushes or, things of that nature. And at this point, who knows, that might happen too. But the main part is really stock photography designed specifically for compositors.
And so the name of the website is CompositingStock.com. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the idea here then is that people could purchase an image and they would get a layered file, and one layer would have the cone in place as a visual reference for size. Yeah. And then the other layer would not have the cone there, obviously. Yeah. And then the idea would be is that if they wanted to, they could also purchase a cone, so that they could take their own photographs with the cone in place and have a real sort of total match between the size.
And it really does. It is based on that expectation, because needless to say, if somebody just said, well, here's a traffic cone on the side of the road, it might not be the same size. So it would kind of defeat the purpose a little bit. So on the website, the cones are also available for sale for a buyer of the stock backgrounds if they want. And it's basically, I'm probably losing money actually on the shipment of the cone, because unless I was willing to buy, in fact, my original thought was I found a place in China that was willing to send me 500 cones, and my wife was like, don't know if we want to have 500 cones in our garage just in case. So right now I'm getting them from a different source, where every so often I buy 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever and then ship them out to people. So that's an option. Some people may choose to only use the textures or the other design elements where they don't need a cone. But those backgrounds, yes, if they really want to take full advantage of the layered document, then having the same cone makes sense.
Could somebody, if you knew what the height of the cone was, could somebody basically just make a kind of collapsible, cardboard poster board thing that had that?
They could probably make something that would be the equivalent, or I mean, in a pinch, I suppose, even if they just knew it was 18 inches high, they could have, a stick that they'd marked off, 18 inches or something like that.
18 inches high,
Part of what I've found is there have been a couple of times where the cone also helped with the angle of the shot, because if it was shot, from higher up looking down or vice versa, the cone kind of adjusts accordingly. So there's some advantage to having the dimensional aspect of it. But certainly, if someone wanted to try that, I'm sure it would work, because there's no secret in the fact that the cone is 18 inches, or if you're in Europe, 45 centimeters, which brings up a good point. It costs too much for me to ship cones to Europe, so I have members already in Australia and UK and where else? Sweden, I think, who have found sources on their kind of local Amazon that it's the same cone, the same size, so they're able to purchase it themselves locally instead of me having to charge a ridiculous amount of money to ship this thing over to a different country.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, shipping things overseas in recent years, at least from the U.S., has gotten prohibitively expensive. It used to be actually fairly reasonable, and the last time I had to do it, I kind of had to gulp with shock.
Well, and especially unless you want it to take 3 months to get there, it's any reasonable delivery time is fairly expensive. But luckily, people have found some sources, and I do have a private Facebook group for the contributing photographers, where some of those people are sharing, here's the cone that I found in Amazon, Australia. So who live in that part of the world can at least be able to source one if they wish to become a contributing photographer.
So on that note, contributing photographer, in addition to being able to go to compositingstock.com and look at the photographs and see if any of them match your needs if you're creating a composite, you can also sign up to, as you say, be a contributing photographer, and using the cone, you can be taking photographs wherever you live and submitting them for the stock library there, and then also receiving some payment for that.
Yeah, basically the anyone who wants to, I'm making a fairly big leap of faith here that someone who would be interested in this knows what they're doing photographically speaking. So there's no qualification process like some stock sites, you have to submit X number of photos. Mine, it's more like, hey, if you want to buy a cone and give it a shot, the images do have to be approved. So when I get a notification that someone's uploaded them, and I look at them and make sure that they're technically done the correct way, but also on a couple of times it's sort of made a suggestion like, this is so far away, like the cone was so tiny that if you imagine a person was standing there, you would hardly even see them. So, but yeah, the way it works basically is there's two pricing structures. The layered images are currently $25, and any other image, whether it's a single background or a design element, are $15, and the contributing photographer gets 40% of that. Now, right now, as sort of a grand opening special, if you will, to try and motivate photographers to go out there and shoot images specifically for the site. Once photographers reach, I have to correct myself, I think it's either 20 or 25 images. Once they've submitted that much, but they do that by the mid-November, then their commission rate goes up to 50%, because I'm just trying to build up more inventory of images. So it's there's been a number of people that I've shipped cones out to, and they haven't uploaded any images yet, because it does take you can't just walk outside and go, oh, here's the photo of something. You have to kind of think, where would be a good spot, that I would, if I had a person with me, where would
my backyard?
Exactly. So it does take a bit of effort, and it takes a bit of time, because we are uploading 2-layered Photoshop files. They're not JPEG with compression, so those are big files. So it can take a while to upload them, but it gives the advantage of the person who's downloading them has a full-size PSD file with the 2 layers that they use, as we talked about, to do the actual compositing.
And so full size, is that just full size based on whatever the full size is of the camera that the
I think, and there is a technical limitation. I forget what it is, but so people who have the very latest, greatest cameras probably have to scale it down a little bit, because by the time they make 2 layers of a huge, coming out of the latest Canon or Nikon, whatever, they'll probably get a message saying this file's a little bit too big, but they're still very reasonably sized. I'm thinking it's probably like 4,500 pixels or something like that. So it's still a pretty decent size for most things that people are going to be doing. And then the other non-layer documents, of course, those are straight JPEG. So those can be even bigger if people want them to.
Is I assume that these are going to be 8-bit Photoshop files? not going to be worried about 16-bit.
Yeah.
You know, I suppose you could always download them in pairs in terms of like 2 JPEGs that are paired, one with the cone, one without. And then they'd have to put them together. It might save some download time.
That's possible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting idea, and I'm interested actually to actually give it a try myself and say, well, let's see how this works. So, can you give us a little tour and show us?
Yeah, sure.
And show us kind of a little bit behind the scenes of how it works.
Sure. So this is the site here. It's basically, in terms of how it operates, it looks and feels like pretty much any stock photo site where there's a series of galleries you can choose from, or of course you can search for something. It also shows you the latest editions and things like that. But one of the things that I can't help but do as an educator is I also have a series of tutorials that talk about how it works and how, if you're selling photos, how to set them up. There's also free tutorials on, if you're not that familiar with masking and things of that nature, there's things like that. But as an example, if I was looking for something, I could say I want to do something that involves maybe a brick wall. So I'll just search for brick, and it comes back and shows me all the various options. Now, this is including both JPEGs and the layer document. So if you wanted to narrow it down and say, just show me the ones that have the cone in them, you can click on the button that says, just show me the backgrounds with cones. And now you can look at them, and if there's one that you wanted to look more closely at, when you hover over it, it shows you a bigger view. But if you actually click on it, it goes to this larger view. And then when you hover over it, you can kind of examine it even further to see more detail. And then at that point,
nice.
You can add it to your, the images that you're interested to your shopping cart, if you will. But as I mentioned there, I've also included quite a few tutorials. And the other thing that I'm always the kind of person where, to me, seeing is believing, or trying is believing. So one of the things that I've got here for anyone who wants to try it is there's actually a background and then several different models, and they're taken with the cone in them. So this is what it would look like with, so if you are interested, you can download those two and actually try it for yourself. So you actually, instead of just believing what I say, that I think it really helps, this way you can actually give it a shot yourself and see if it works as well for you as it does for me. And like I said, then there's also the other elements like textures and design elements and things of that nature.
And so when like a contributing photographer uploads images, are they the ones who are keywording the file, or does that happen kind of on your end?
Yeah, no, they keyword it. So they'll put things in particular galleries, like ones that have depth of field in them. They'll indicate that they have created, a photo that has depth of field in it. And then whatever keywords and description.
So when you say depth of field, are you referring to sort of obvious shallow depth of field?
Yes. So basically, if you imagine that you had a person standing in front of a background and you shot, at like 2.8 or something, so the background dropped out a little bit, the photos are taken that way, as if there was, so you focus on someone as if there was someone in the foreground, so the background becomes, and they're not Photoshop Gaussian blur backgrounds, they're actually someone who's set their camera to manual focus and focused on something close, and then to simulate what it would look like as if there was someone standing in there. So
I see.
An example of one that's like a base on a baseball field, and you can see the background is got that nice shallow depth of field in it.
And then are there also keywords that would indicate maybe the time of day that the picture was taken, or the type of lighting, in case people need to sort of match a certain type of lighting?
At this point, I haven't gone down that road, but that's something that would be pretty easy to add, because one of the advantages that both I have as the administrator, but also the contributing photographers, is they could certainly go in and add that information if they wanted to. And it has some, let's see what's in here. So it's bringing in EXIF data that it finds from the image, so you can at least get more information if you want to, and it's giving me the time, but that assumes that my camera was set correctly, which it probably wasn't. So
yeah, I went on a trip once, and I got a rental camera from borrowlenses.com, and it never occurred to me to check the date on the camera, and it was like it was totally wrong, so I got back at all the date stamps on my pictures were all like totally messed up. A cautionary tale.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. I know that with my own personal Lightroom library, since I do a lot of compositing, I'm always keywording for so I can find things easily when I want to use them in a compositing project. And so keywording for time of day and type of light is one thing that I do, but
Sure.
but the addition of that cone really is intriguing in terms of making it easy to match up size in an image. And as you say, with the full length composite, that's always sort of an issue.
Sure.
So do you have something you can show us in Photoshop as to how that works?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
So I'm going to actually use the same images that are available for free, if someone can download it. So this is what it would look like when you opened it, although this top layer is probably usually showing. You can see, other than the clouds moving, it was taken on a tripod, so that the cone, when you show and hide that layer, that's really the only difference between them. And needless to say that, the other elements really aren't important. It's really just that cone.
Yeah.
So now I happen to use Bridge. So if I pick the image, and here's a series I took in a studio, each with making sure the cone was nearby. So I'm just going to place this one in there. And because it's raw, at first I'm just going to click OK, but I have my camera raw set up to open in Photoshop as a smart object, which I take full advantage of when I'm doing compositing, because it creates this nice little two-way street back and forth, so I can continue to edit. So at this point, I'm just trying to get it in. And as a side note, just from a compositing tip, one of the mistakes that I know I used to make was I would open a photograph of a person and spend all this time making a really good selection of them and then drag them into the background photo. And I realized sometimes I was spending too much time working on detail that I couldn't even see in the context of the new background. So I always, even without the cone, I always recommend the first step would be drag the photo of the person in, then every decision you make from then on is in context. So what I normally do is just lower the opacity down a little bit so I can see what I'm doing, and then line up the cones and do free transform. And let's get a little closer as well. And one of the sort of side benefits that I hadn't really thought about, and I'm going to try to get it pretty close to the same size, is in this, and this is a good example in this image. So I'm going to hide this layer for a second. Because the cone is vibrant orange, it made me realize, for example, look in this photo, you can see there's actually puddles with a little reflection. Now, if I didn't have that cone there, I don't know that I would have thought to go, oh, I probably would see a little reflection of her in this puddle here. Because the cone was there, it helped me realize that. It also, when you look at it, one of the other things I find people do all the time is they said, oh, you should add a shadow. Well, not every day there's a shadow. Like in this case, there's maybe a hair of a shadow, but nothing like you would see on a sunny day. So that's the other thing, is it helps from that respect. So at this point, the cone layer has basically served its purpose. So I could either delete it or just hide it, and then go back to this layer. And at this point, it just becomes compositing. So I, do it really quickly just for the sake of demonstration. I'm going to have to tweak it as we go here, but I'm just using the quick selection tool because I find that when I shoot on a background like this works pretty well. Actually, let me take a step back. One thing that anytime I have a photo of person with fine hair detail, one little trick that I do, which I find really helps, is I separate my selection into two halves. The part of the person that has nice hard edges like her body, and then her hair. So I'm going to take that placed camera raw file and duplicate it and then hide one of them. So this way, when I'm making my selection, and in a second I'm going to use refine edge to try and tweak this, all I'm going to worry about is up into and including her head, but I'm not going to really worry about getting her hair at this point. So just like this, probably right up to about there. And then I go to refine edge. I use this view called on layers. And here's the reason why I suggested bring the person into the background first, because now right away you're seeing her in the context of the new background. So I'm going to look at that and say, well, that actually looks decent. Not her hair yet, because I haven't done that part. Make that a layer mask and click OK. And then go to the other layer, which all I'm really worried about in this case is her hair. So I'm just going to make a selection on this one of just the hair parts of her, like that maybe, and go back to refine edge. Now it's still showing me the other layer because of course it's there, but now normally I don't like to move this smart radius thing too much, because even though Adobe says you can do both hard and soft edges at the same time, I find that's not necessarily the case. But because all I'm working on is this layer with the hair, now I can push this a little further. Yeah, that was probably a little too far, but that's why we experiment, and find that there's, you know, bits of hair in here that I can find that I wouldn't have found before.
And just to clarify for people watching, what you're doing is you're using that refine edge brush, which is active when you get into that dialog, and you're painting over the edges in an effort to tell Photoshop to, you know, hey, have another look at this and see if you can do a better job.
Exactly. And what I found too is that sometimes, like right here, I painted and it didn't look like it found any hair, but if you change the view to black and white, sometimes you'll see there is actually a bit more detail there than you might otherwise have noticed. So that's another option as well. But let's put it back to on layers for a second. And then we'll make that into a layer mask. Oops, sorry, layer mask as well. And back at step one, when I placed her in here, this is a camera raw smart object. So when I look at her, if I think maybe the settings aren't quite correct, or the exposure's off, or the color tone or something like that, if I double click, it's allowing me to go back to camera raw. So now I can make some adjustments based on the context of the photograph if I wish to. And it's going to update both the layers because they're just this two copies of the same thing. And then because we talked about the reflection of the cone, I would take this top layer and I want to preserve that smart object. So I'm going to convert it to a smart object and then transform and flip vertical and drag down there. This is where I would try to create that reflection that we were seeing with that cone, so that just like there was a reflection, I would go back to this background layer and do this really quickly, but try to pick up anywhere where I think there might be a little reflection in the wood. And if I had more time, I'd be much more careful about this, of course, and get in even closer. But that would allow me then on this top layer to add a mask. And the other thing that it did is I would have expected that the reflection would have been really blurry, but it's really not as blurry as I would expect. So that's the other thing the cone is providing. I'd probably still go in here and do a very slight little blur just to help sell it a little bit. That was a very, quick version. And I would still look and say, maybe I still need to do a little bit of work on the lighting around her feet and things like that. But the main thing was that first step of just finding the right size for her in the context of this photograph. It's just so much easier because the cone is right there to help you with that. And then, as you mentioned, also helps with things like reflections or shadows, or even the angle of the cone sometimes will make you realize that, if you've already chosen your background, then that can help you decide what angle to shoot the photograph, the portrait of the person.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is that in just kind of looking at this right now, if I was doing this composite and I didn't have the cone, my instinct would be actually to make her a little bit larger. But, the proof is there because you did size up the cone to be the same size. And
that's a good point. And I've had times where I have used the cone and then I went back and looked at the next day and made her 20% larger because my eyes said, I think she could stand to be bigger, but the cone is the proof, really. But as you said, visually, you may just decide based on what you find, but at least it's helping you narrow that down. So instead of being a total guess, you're getting a much better frame of reference.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and certainly the point you made about the reflection or the shadow it's great to have that reference there. Because as you say, like in this particular image, you wouldn't necessarily have maybe thought about the reflection.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Especially in such a small, narrow, bit of water on the boardwalk there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's very, very cool. Although, when I look at this, speaking of cool, I think that, boy, she's got to be cold there on that day,
Well, this was still Florida, so that probably meant it was like 72 or something because it had just rained.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see a picture like that, and I think, ooh, it's chilly out. Well, that was pretty cool, and hats off to you for a really cool idea, and implementing it in a way that other people can take advantage of.
Sure.
I think I'm definitely going to have to go onto the website and download some of those tryout files and give it a spin myself. And who knows, maybe I'll be contacting you saying, hey, I need one of those cones, Dave. And so if people are interested in becoming a contributing photographer for this, they can just find all that at CompositingStock.com.
Yeah, there's just a very simple login where you set up an account, and then when you sign up to say, I want to be a contributing photographer in North America, it automatically tries to charge you for the cone. You can choose not to do that right away if you want to try out just uploading some other things like textures, but it generates that automatically. And then usually I wait till I get at least a handful of orders before I ship off a bunch of cones. So it could take a week or two for people to get them. But in the meantime, they can still start browsing through and seeing what are people doing, watching the tutorials on, because there's both a video tutorial as well as a PDF file that shows how to prepare for people who aren't that familiar with Photoshop to create a 2-layer document, and then they have to create a separate thumbnail and things like that. It's all outlined in a PDF instructional file.
Yeah. And is there like a place for people to enter in like their wish list or requests?
Yeah, so there actually is a wish list. It's pretty rudimentary at this point because it's just a service that I found where people can add comments. But as an example, one of the first people testing out the site had added the comment that on their wish list would be the "Welcome to Las Vegas" sign. And it turns out that one of the contributing photographers lives in Vegas. So he went over and took a photo with the cone and uploaded it. So that person, can't guarantee it's going to always happen that quickly for someone, but at least one of the things it does is it helps the contributing photographer that's like, I'm not sure what else to go out and shoot. They can look at that list and go, oh, old cars or, alleyways or whatever people are asking for. It's just another way to generate some ideas.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a great way to sort of almost have like a little interactive component to it where you can, say, oh, it'd be really great if I could have this sort of image. And then, the network of photographers, exactly. Somebody out there might be able to fulfill that request.
Yeah,
so cool.
It's kind of like stock photography on demand.
There you go. So Dave, in addition to CompositingStock.com, which is, of course, your new website here that we've been talking about, where else can people find you out there on the internet, and what other projects you got going on?
Well, the main thing I'm doing as well, as I mentioned at the top, is this online training site, which is online.davecrossworkshops.com. And it's a subscription-based online training site where I have both full-length courses, mini courses, as well as shorter tutorials. And one of the things that I like to think makes it kind of unique is that subscribers are encouraged to send in questions that I can then answer in the form of a video. So instead of me just always trying to come up with content that I think would be of interest, I'm often, in fact, it happens almost every week these days, that someone sends in a question. I may not answer it directly because it's very specific, but I at least, address it and talk about why that becomes, for example, using smart filters or whatever it might be. So that's the main thing that I'm working on today. I'm also relatively active in the other social media things like Twitter and Facebook and things like that, but mostly, and I do have a couple of other sites that are kind of in, what's the word, polite way to say, limbo, where they exist, but I haven't been adding any fresh content to them in some time. So probably not worth directing anyone there. But dcross.com is my overall website that sort of points to everything, including ebooks and whatever else is happening to be going on.
That's your Dave Cross portal, right?
Pretty much, yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good enough. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on today. Again, really intriguing idea for this website, and be interesting to see how it develops. And I may be playing around with one of those orange safety cones myself in the near future. Cool.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you out there in internet land for tuning in to The Fix. Remember, you can always subscribe to the iTunes audio version of this, or you can watch the video version on the website at thisweekinphoto.com/TheFix. And while you're there, take time to check out some of the other cool photography-related podcasts that are available. I'm Sean Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week on The Fix.